Okay, well, hey there, Janet. It's so great to see you here on the Confident Sober Women podcast. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I love the title, Confident Sober Women. Yes. And I tell you what, being sober does give you confidence. It really does. I certainly didn't have this level of self-assurance when I was a drinker. That much is for sure. So yeah, I'm a 40 something year old woman. It's not a secret. I actually just can't remember. Um, I think it's 46, maybe. Um, I live in the UK in the north. It's very cold here. I have three grown-up daughters who are 18, 18, and 18. And yes, they are triplets. I know. And I stopped drinking 3.5 years ago, it is now. So, but I first started, um, I ran into difficulties with alcohol a couple of years before that. Um, and I think for me, there was a real moment when I can almost pinpoint when my drinking changed from being, I mean, to be honest, it was problematic and I didn't realize it to being problematic and I did realize it. And that's when my husband had a diagnosis of a brain tumor. So we're getting straight into it now, aren't we? But yeah, it was awful. It was such a big life event and um I had no idea it was coming. It really did sort of take the legs out from under me. And he went into hospital very quickly. He had an operation. The tumor grew back. He had a second op. After the second op, he couldn't walk. But actually, here we are, what, 5, 6 years later, he's still alive. So it was successful. Um, we know that he won't grow old, but we've been given the gift of another decade or so from the treatment, which is amazing. But I really thought I would lose him within a year or two, which is what happens to most people with that diagnosis. And so we've been really lucky. But yeah, my drinking just got so dark. It was literally the like within months, this whole thing, this was kind of like over a period of about a year where he was in hospital and learning to walk again. And I was at home with three, at the time, 13-year-olds who were very anxious and worried about their dad. And I just kept drinking a full bottle or even more of wine a night, getting up in the morning, banging headache, feeling rubbish, getting up, going to the hospital, like getting the kids off to school, go to the hospital, see my husband, watch him struggling, feel awful, come home, cook dinner, try and log on to work, try and get some work done, get the kids from school, reassure them, take them to see their dad, give them some food, get them to bed. And by the time I'd done all that, I was like, I need wine. And it just became really problematic. I was drinking like I was guzzling wine because I wanted to switch my head off. I was like, I just want to drink this as quickly as I can because I don't want to think anymore. And it was so scary. Yeah, what a dark place. So yeah, that was a long intro, wasn't it?
So, what has it been like the last 3 years? Like, how did you get
Mm.
sober and stay sober? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I spent quite a bit of time locked in that cycle, and eventually I reached out and asked for help. And it took me a really long time to ask for help, as I'm sure it does for most people, because the stigma, worrying about what people would say, thinking I should be able to manage this on my own, thinking oh, I'm not that bad. I don't drink in the morning, so I'm not really an alcoholic, so I don't think I can go to AA. All of these things that we all think, don't we? Like when we're struggling with addiction, we
Yeah.
we don't realize actually that there's this whole world of sober people who will welcome you with open arms if you ask for help. And it took me so much courage to ask for help. That was the biggest step, was deciding to get help. Once I decided that and I reached out, I actually found myself a local counsellor who was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I did 12 weeks with him, and it wasn't like a 12-step program. It was much more holistic than that, maybe kind of a little bit more like counseling, really. And of course, we spent one week talking about drinking and the other 11 weeks talking about trying to work through all the reasons why you're drinking. We went right back, looking at relationship with alcohol from a young age. I grew up surrounded by alcohol. Some of my earliest memories of being in the pub with my mum used to work behind the bar, and my dad would take me in. They'd sit me on the bar, they'd give me treats. I'd be carried round by drunk people probably, and it was all very happy and warm and fuzzy and nice. And so I had to kind of work through a load of stuff about my relationship with alcohol and decouple my identity from the party girl and the drinker and actually just try and work out who I really was. And that was so tough. And certainly wasn't done in 12 weeks, but I did enough to know how to carry on. And of course, I met other sober people. I joined communities, I joined online communities, I listened to podcasts like yours, I read books. And yeah, I can't actually believe that I'm standing here now being one of those people on the podcast, actually, because yeah, I didn't think it was possible for me, but I just got really inspired, by listening to other people saying I stopped drinking and my life got better. That's what everyone said. And I just kept thinking, well, they can't be lying. They can't all be lying. Like maybe it'll be okay. Maybe I'll get through this. Maybe I'll feel better. And of course, that started to kick in and I was sleeping better and my skin got better and my anxiety reduced and my depression started to lift. And yeah, I went through a phase of being probably quite annoying and bouncing out of bed at 5 in the morning and going for runs and like telling people that they should all stop drinking because it was the best thing in the world and just sort of generally annoying people. But, I kind of calmed down a bit and yeah. But, I try not to be evangelical about it because people do not want to be told to stop drinking. If you're not ready, it's the last thing in the world you want to hear.
Right.
So I try to now kind of inspire people by just explaining what a big difference it's made to my mental and physical health and well-being.
Mhm.
And, that maybe it might be interesting to take a break.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. And what you've done is really given us such a big, um, true picture about what it was like for you and like
Yeah.
what it was like to get and stay sober. And
Yeah.
there are so many lies that occur that we believe. Like when you mentioned the drinking in the morning thing, I don't know why this is such a thing for us. I never drank in the morning, and I
Yeah.
was a full blown raging alcoholic. Like I don't understand why we think this is a thing. Like,
No,
who told us that, or where did it
I
come from?
know. I
This
think
is one
it's
of the
from a
ones that I'm
film
just like,
somewhere. Yeah.
where is this? Like, this needs to
Yeah.
go away because it's not a
Yes.
thing. But even other things, subtle things like, I won't be able to I won't be able to go out, or how can I
Yeah.
work, or how can I mother without
Yes.
alcohol? These are the lies that continuously
Yeah.
run in the background, even after we get and stay sober for a little while. And that's something that I work really hard on with my community is sort of dispelling those lies, really understanding what the truth is about them, and then how we can live that truth out. So,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all that. And wow, a mother to triplets. That's amazing. I
Yeah.
have three
It's
older kids too, but they're 20, 18, and 16. So they're close in
yeah.
age, but not quite triplets.
Yeah. I honestly I really thought things would be easy by now and they just require a lot of emotional support still, don't I mean,
Yeah.
obviously it seems
It's
obvious now.
actually, I've been
Yeah.
hearing very frequently actually, this age 20 to 25 is worse.
Oh,
And I'm
brilliant.
like, oh, awesome. That's so
Can't wait.
great. I can't
Yeah.
wait. Because our
Yeah, it's all
teenagers
good.
were a little bit challenging in our house. We didn't have a
Yeah.
medical emergency like you did. And so sorry to hear about your husband with that. I know how scary that must have been, and
Yeah.
still is
Yeah.
for you guys all. But we just
Yeah.
did have our own challenges. And to think of, but you know what the best part is doing it sober. Although there's many times, I don't know, for me, where I've wanted to say like, oh God, I wish I could
Yeah.
numb out with something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And there are also times when, even in my sobriety, I have found ways to do that where I've acted alcoholically, with food or social media or just internet
Yeah.
use or something like that, where we can find other ways to numb out. And it takes a lot of intention to really find what works for you
Yeah.
to feel good, right?
Yeah.
Find what feels
Yeah.
good for you.
I went through a phase after I stopped drinking of buying things that I didn't
Yes.
need online generally. Like you say, sort of scrolling and seeing things and go, oh, I want to buy that, I want to buy that. And I ended up having to have like a shopping holiday, which sounds like you're going to New York for the weekend, doesn't it? But what I actually mean by that is a break from shopping where I had a month where, in fact, I don't think I did 3 months. I think I did 12 weeks where I didn't buy anything apart from, food, groceries, gas, electricity, basic needs and nothing else. And every time I wanted to buy something, I had to write it down. And then at the end of the 3 months, I allowed myself to buy the things that I still really, really wanted, which was basically one thing, which was a new Fitbit because my Fitbit had broken. And that was it. And there was
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of pounds worth of things that I didn't really want or need on the list. It was very interesting that I'd sort of transferred my um compulsion into something else.
Well,
So I
it's
had
not
to kind of work
unusual.
on that.
I
Yeah.
think we do find what I think we find the thing, right? For me, it became food. It can very easily become Netflix or other things for me too. And
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with those things. Obviously,
Yeah.
indulging ourselves with food or even in enjoying a quiet afternoon on it's very snowy here. It's the second storm
Yeah.
we've had this week. Enjoying a movie or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, there's nothing
Exactly.
wrong with any of those things. But if you're starting to notice a pattern where you're just kind of avoiding other things or you're using it, it's that dopamine hit. Like, that's what we're
Yeah.
looking for. We're looking for the dopamine hit, and we have to
Yeah.
find it in ways that are really positive for us. Things like,
Yeah.
movement, moving
Yes.
our body and being physical, creativity, writing
Yeah.
or art or creating anything really, whatever, what your thing is,
Yeah.
or just spending time connecting with your kids or your friends, or go to sporting events. We're going to the Ravens
Yeah.
game tomorrow. It's going to be 20 degrees. Like, uh, hopefully
Yeah.
we'll survive it, but it's fun. It's that gives us a dopamine
Yeah.
hit.
It does. It does. And for me, I've found cold water swimming, which is a massively growing trend here in the UK. I can see from your face it's not for you, perhaps, but yeah, I mean, I've got like a little ice bath type thing in the garden, and
Yes.
I just had to break the ice on it to get in it, and I was like, my husband's sort of looking at me going, "What on earth are you doing?" But it just gives me that minute of like, you can't really think about anything else because all you can do is kind of try and breathe and stay alive.
Yes.
And it gives me that clarity that
Yes.
I was seeking from guzzling wine. It gives me that, like, it's like pressing reset on my brain. Like when you restart your computer and everything just works again. It's like that for my brain. So I love doing it. I absolutely love it.
We have one of those
And
as well. My son gets in it every day
yeah,
probably, and I have yet to get in it. I
yeah,
should, because I understand the benefits. I've read about it and I understand
yeah.
why it's so important. I just haven't gotten the courage up to do it yet.
It's maybe start in the summer.
Yeah, right. I know it's like literally frozen out there probably.
Yeah, I would I started in the summer and then it just gradually gets colder and colder and by then you're sort of a little bit hooked on it. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
you
he
don't
talks about
notice.
it, how it's such a good mental game for him. Like, it's really kind of about just being in the zone, like letting
Yeah,
your mind kind of take over and reminding you that you can
yes.
do hard things. We can
Yeah,
do hard things, and we've
yes.
already done hard things by getting sober in a world that's
Yeah.
obsessed with alcohol. And I think that's a great transition to one of the reasons why I really wanted to chat with you here is because of the work that you have been doing related to alcohol-free workplaces. And I'm really just curious if you could say a little bit more about how you even kind of got involved with that. Like, what was the start of it, and what you're doing with it? And I'd love to just chat about it.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I realized that when I got sober, I looked back on my career and I've been in corporate jobs all my life, and I thought about all the well-being provision that it exists in corporate, and of which I've been, the grateful recipient of many courses and events and webinars and online resources. And I just thought, well, no one's, I've done all the yoga, all the meditation, all the sleep hygiene, all the running, all the physical stuff, all the like mental well-being, stress reduction. I've done all those things, but it's no point, is there? If you go home and drink a bottle of wine every night, then it's just like you can't out yoga your way out of an alcohol addiction. So why does no one ever talk about the fact that if you're drinking more than you're happy with, then you should perhaps start there before you even think about starting yoga because, there's no point, is there? And it's really, to me, like the elephant in the well-being room. And I regularly even get invited now to go and speak at well-being events. and they always have drinks afterwards. And it amazes me. I'm like, you've spent all day talking about mental health and well-being, and then you're serving alcohol. It baffles me. There's so people don't understand how much alcohol is affecting their well-being. And that's really what drives me. I just really believe that if more people understood what it was actually doing to them, they could have a better life. And they could enjoy life more and have less anxiety and just have a more fulfilled life where they're more likely to reach their full potential. And so I set about kind of talking about this at the workplace that I was in. Um, I managed to influence the policies to make them more supportive for people who ran into difficulties. So all the policies were quite punitive and very sort of, you know, if you if you get caught drinking, then this is which disciplinary process to use. Whereas what they now say is if you come forward and ask for help with alcohol use, this is the support that you can get. And
Mm.
yes, of course, it still protects the company. And if you decide to drink on duty and punch someone in the face, then of course you can get dismissed for gross misconduct. But, there is a balance in the policy now that there didn't used to be. And I also decided to set up a peer support network in the workplace, which everyone in my team told me, we've got a really nice, close-knit little team, and they were all really, like they all work underneath me, but they were like, boss, we're really worried about you putting this out there. And, like everyone's going to know that you had an alcohol problem, and I don't think anyone's going to come. And I was like, I'm still doing it. I'm just going to do it anyway and see what happens. And they were like, okay, but yeah, we'll be here to catch you when you come back crying. And I had 75 people in the first
Right,
meetup.
right.
Yeah, and now I was like, yeah, I thought there would be a few people out there.
Oh my
Guess what? There
gosh.
are. Yeah.
Have you watched the Lessons in Chemistry show?
No, I haven't.
It was a book, apparently. This is completely unrelated, but it just made me think of that because I was
Yeah.
watching one of the episodes yesterday, and it's a lovely story about this woman. I think it was in the 50s, so she was a chemist, and obviously that was very kind of different at that time
Yeah.
of the world, right, for women to be working, especially in a male dominated field. And she was like really really very independent, wanted to just do this thing, and like kept getting roadblock. Anyway, long story short, she ends up on this TV show. She gets found by this guy who puts her on a TV show as like a cook. They wanted like a hot wife type, like
Oh,
who
right.
would
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
look good but also would be telling, so that the men would be interested too, I guess. And
Yeah.
anyway, so she goes on and she starts talking about food and cooking, but in in relation to chemistry. So
Oh,
like what the
brilliant.
chemical reactions were and why the skin on the chicken gets crispy. And it was really cool. But so anyway, the producers thought it was like, this is ridiculous, blah 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 blah. Well, all of these women, like they thought no one was going to watch this
Yeah.
because nobody was interested, but it turns out that the women were like starving for somebody
Yeah.
to help them understand cooking
Yes.
better and like how to make things, I don't know, it was just very interesting. So that
Yeah.
it was like that, right? Like so all
Yeah.
these people showed up for
Yes.
her and for what her message,
Yeah.
when nobody believed that the message was valuable at
Yeah.
all.
No, not at all. Not at
Right.
all. And that's the biggest barrier that I have really in
Yeah.
growing the business is that, there's some skepticism with employers that people will want something like that at work,
Yeah.
but they do. Um,
Well, they do, and I think it's very obvious when you look around and see the explosion of the non-alcoholic drink
exactly.
space,
Yeah.
like explosion, right? And
Mhm.
so when there's this much hype around a product, then there must be a market for it, right? And
Yes.
so then that ultimately then speaks to the fact that we need to help workplaces and employers understand the impact that alcohol has on their community as an employer, and also what we can do to be more supportive.
Yeah.
And so
And
like it's kind of like the messaging is there. It's telling us
yeah.
there's a need.
Yeah. I mean, I was really inspired by um I think the thing that really drives me is that fear that I had of asking for help. I was so scared of asking for help. And when I put myself back there, I I think about what stopped me, and it was stigma.
Yeah.
It was the stigma. And when I look at other topics that have been destigmatized, I thought immediately of mental health, anxiety, depression, and actually more recently menopause. And I think the single biggest thing that's helped has been really progressive employers bringing these things out into the open. I don't think when I first joined the workforce in the late 90s that you would hear men use the word menopause ever, or people would pretend that they had physiotherapy appointments when they actually were going to see a therapist.
Right.
Nobody would talk about those things.
Right.
And that's completely different today. And I thought about what did they do? How did they do it? And I kind of tried to mimic that with the topic of alcohol. So I thought about policy, I thought about culture, I thought about telling stories, bringing things out into the open, shining a light on it. And yeah, I ultimately what I did is I kind of experimented with the employer where I was employed until I'd got things right. Then I went and tested it on a few other employers. And then eventually I created these 12 standards that make up the alcohol safe workplace accreditation.
Okay.
And then so that's what I work with now is I help employers to meet the 12 standards. And then I have an independent panel of experts who checks their evidence and makes sure that they are at the standard. And they're completely unrelated to the sales part of the business. So they are not incentivized to give the accreditation out at all. They get paid whether they give it or don't give it. They just do the work. And that gives it a lot of integrity. And I'm really happy with how it's kind of working. Um, and I've got some amazing people on the panel as well who are really experienced in all different aspects of alcohol culture and life and sobriety and yeah, all
This has
sorts of
been
people.
so incredible and I think so necessary for, I
Mm,
love how you made the connection to other topics or issues that have been destigmatized. I think that's really helpful to understand. Like, we have done this with a variety of other
yeah,
issues, even going back to like disabilities, right? So, like,
yeah,
if you go way back to people who were disabled and maybe written off by the
yeah.
workforce, right? Like, well, you are in a wheelchair, or oh, you're
Mm,
this or that or that, whatever, you can't work, and that's just not true.
mm.
And so now we're just adding it to this other issue, the topic around substance use. So I'm curious, I don't want to give away all of your secrets, but if you could say a little bit more about, like, what exactly did you do with some of, like, the policies, for example, in your employer to help make things more, I think the word you use on your websites and things are inclusive,
Yeah,
and it would help an employee, if they were coming to work there, understand that should this come up in their life, or maybe it already is in their life, they would be supported.
yeah, yeah. There's a few things around policy. So, the first thing is to make sure that the policy is always going to give an employee an opportunity to kind of put things right, I suppose, if they come forward and say, "Look, I've been drinking on the job, for example, or I do drink at work because I'm an alcoholic and I need help," that instead of being immediately dismissed on the spot, which is what happens a lot of the time, is that they would be given an opportunity to get the support and help that they need. Of course, eventually the employer would ultimately have the right to go down a disciplinary route, but the point is that it's not the first port of call. So I talk a lot to employers who have like drugs and alcohol testing for drivers. Um, and that hour when someone's failed an alcohol or drugs test at work, what happens to them in the next hour could shape the rest of their life. So you can, if you've got someone in front of you who is clearly ready to make a change and willing to do the work and wants help, and you dismiss them, that's going to result in a completely different outcome for them than if you say, okay, well, we've got a program actually. You can see a therapist for 12 weeks and you can have some time off. And after that, you can have time off for appointments. And we'll give you an alcohol contract that says if you fail another, you're going to be tested more regularly. If you fail another test, then you will be dismissed. But here's your opportunity. That's a completely different outcome for that person. One is potentially homelessness, loss of family, income, status, everything. The other is keeping a job, being a really loyal, dedicated employee who always remembers the support they got in their time of need.
Yeah.
So what kind of employer do you want to be? Um,
Right. And then that word gets out, right? Then
yeah,
people talk. They're
yeah,
like, I work for XYZ company, and wow, they've been so supportive of my issues. And like
yeah,
that, it just spreads. It's like a disease, right? But a good way,
yeah,
in a good way. It spreads out to the
yeah,
communities of like, this is an inclusive and a safe workplace to be in.
yeah,
And it makes perfect sense to be able to be more so to be supportive versus
yeah,
punitive. I think that's a shift that I think we've seen some in the last couple decades, but
yes,
I know that there are a lot of employers and companies that probably just aren't quite on board yet. And I'm really glad to
yes.
see that there are people like you that are bringing it to light that honestly, it doesn't excuse people of their behavior, right? It doesn't excuse them
No,
of their responsibilities, right? They still have to be accountable for their job or for their mistakes. Like if they stole money or something, you still have to be accountable for that. But it just
exactly.
means you don't just fire them on the spot, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. And also, I think there's a very clear need to have really open kind of resources for people to access. So I'm not saying that you have to put each and every person in your organization through kind of alcohol awareness education. But what I would like is for an employee like me to be able to go onto the intranet at work and type in the word alcohol, and instead of just finding all the relevant disciplinary processes, to actually find a bit of help. So the only thing that was on there really was, why don't you go to AA? And it's like, well, of course I've already thought of that, and I don't want to because of the stigma. So how about, the resources that you referred to when we were chatting a minute ago? I produce a booklet called Resources for the Sober Curious, and it is a curation of my favorite books, podcasts, alcohol-free drinks, communities, apps, all sorts of things that you can buy for less than £10 or even free. And I think some like signposting for things, yeah, having something like that on your intranet, which by the way, all my clients have, and I update it 4 times a year. So,
Right.
become a client, you can just have it on your intranet. Um, that is a brilliant way to say, you don't have to be an alcoholic to reset your relationship with alcohol. Here's a load of stuff for you if you're in the, oh, I'm not sure zone, or I might want to take a break for a month, or I might want to cut down, or yeah, experiment
You're
with
saying like
sobriety.
for so what I'm hearing you say, which I think is amazing, is that if you're an employee or considering being an employee at an organization, you're on their website, you're clicking around, you're gonna see
Yeah,
materials, either if you click it on the search bar or if you're just clicking around and maybe like about the company
yeah,
or resources for employees, you're gonna see referral lists and
yeah,
resources specifically related to substance use disorder
yeah,
that somebody can access
yeah,
like
yeah,
that are linked right off of that employee's website. I love this because then it's
yeah,
like really accessible. Because most
exactly.
of us are so well versed. Like our first go to is Google now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so when before we open our mouths, generally speaking, or ask a question or go to somebody, we're gonna do our own. Most of us are gonna do our own searching. So if
Yes.
it's right there for them, if you have a list and on that list is like sober sis, right, and her program, like
Yeah,
or she recovers or whatever,
yeah,
you're gonna be
yeah,
like, wow, oh my gosh, right
yeah,
here are places that I can go to learn more, even if it's
yeah,
just learn more, you know?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the other
yeah.
thing that I think that is amazing that you're doing that as something that I'm super passionate about as well is helping people to create specifically in the workforce alcohol-free events
Yes.
or at least inclusive. Can you
Inclusive
say a little bit more
events.
about how
Yeah.
you're doing that?
Yeah, well, when I work with employers, I ask them to make it a matter of policy that there are respectful alcohol-free options at all workplace events, which I think is really important for it to be in the policy, actually, because there's no new management comes in and says, "Oh, I can't be bothered." That is how we do things around here. So the policy is a starting point. And then we like to bring it to life. We partner with an alcohol-free drinks wholesaler who is really good fun, really, really lovely guy. And we put on teetotal tasting events in workplaces, which is super exciting. And they're a great way of just bringing that topic into the workplace without it being too heavy. Um, and then we usually couple that with a lived experience speaker, sometimes myself, sometimes other people. And then we usually offer some kind of one-to-one sessions afterwards where people can book in and they can do like the screening test to sort of see what type of drinker they are and get appropriate support if they need it for, what their drinking behaviors look like. But also just ask me anything. Like literally, people just check in, and I know I get about maybe 70% of people who were worried about their own drinking, maybe 20% of people who were worried about a loved one, and about 10% of people who are the line manager of someone who clearly has an alcohol issue and they don't know what to do because their employer hasn't provided them with that training yet, which is
Yeah, and
another thing that we do.
I love all that. It's so important, just to
Mm,
bring it to light, right? And so, and some people might be sitting there going like, "Oh my gosh, why are we talking about this?" Or I don't want to hear about, and that's okay. But those might be like two or three people in the room that are like, their ears start to perk
mm,
up, and they're like, "Oh wow, this is interesting." And at events, like most of the time, I mean, I was never in corporate America. I worked in social services for 10 years, and then I started my own private practice as a therapist. But my husband is like, he's a high
yeah.
level executive and always has been. So I've always been around. I've traveled with him. We've been to many, many, many events. We just went to
Mm,
all the Christmas parties, and they're
yeah.
all extremely focused around drinking.
Yes.
I mean, events like, they're always having happy hours or,
Yeah.
parties and things. And and that's fine. It doesn't bother me to go to those places, but it is really nice. And specifically for some people who are uncomfortable socially around that, to have, a sophisticated looking drink that's non-alcoholic that you can, so it looks like you're almost like a part of the group. And
Exactly. Yeah.
at least
Yeah.
then, like, if you are somebody who struggles with answering those questions, or you don't want to have anybody mention what are you drinking or whatever, or not drinking, having a sophisticated drink, and also just to feel special and like a part
Yeah.
of, the
Yeah.
group. But more than that, having like starting to have engaging activities or events that aren't around alcohol, like parties, like on the hand. Janet has an amazing freebie on her website you can get. I'll link it below, that just kind of lists out even ideas, like ideas
Yeah.
of different activities you can do
Yeah.
as a group or an organization that aren't centered around alcohol. And it doesn't mean you can't have alcohol at the events, but at least the event isn't a happy hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so
I just think that they're more memorable as well. People, when you go into a workplace and you say, look, let's just try a little bit of something different for the next team building event, and you do something like you go to one of those we have these little pottery places in England where you go and like paint your own pottery and then it gets put in the kiln, and everyone just has a cup of tea and a biscuit and paints and has a natter, and everyone's just like, do you know that was a really nice change from just going to the pub? And people remember it, and you get
yeah,
different people there. You'll
yes,
get people who don't drink for faith reasons turning up who normally wouldn't actually go on the works night out because they don't want to go into the bar. And you'll get people who are pregnant or people who maybe have young children or whatever who just don't want to do all of that heavy drinking stuff.
mm-hmm.
And I think it's just about being respectful and including everyone, whatever they choose to drink.
I love it. So I really want to leave my listeners. I mean, I would imagine that all of my listeners are either employees or employers, right, of some
Exactly.
type.
Yeah.
So I really want to speak specifically to those who aren't business owners, but obviously all of this applies to you as well. For those of us who are employees, what are some tips or tricks or tools that you can use? Tell them what can they do? What can they go out into the world or into their business and do? Like, what would you advise them?
Well, I've just recently set up a very, very, very small community of pioneers. We called ourselves the Pioneers, and these people are all people who have set up a peer support network in their own workplace. And what we want to do is we want to invite people who might be interested in doing that. You might think, well, I'd love to have that community in my workplace. I wonder if there's other sober people. Maybe I'll set up a little sober curious society in my workplace. If you're interested in doing that, give us a shout and we'll help you because we've all done it. And that's it, really. Just
Yeah,
do
I
it.
mean, yeah, so they
It
could
will,
definitely work with you on that. I mean,
yeah.
and maybe they could even get curious. Like if they wanted to get curious in their own workplace, like how would you suggest they get started? Because it's not like you can put out a big I guess you could try, like, you're not going to email blast all the employees in your company and be like, who's sober?
That's kind of what I did, but
Oh, you did? Okay.
yeah, I kind of did. But well, I think the other thing that would be really interesting is putting your hand up to maybe organize the
Yeah.
next kind of, because they always want people to organize the events, don't they? So maybe you could organize and put forward the idea of doing something that isn't centered around alcohol. I
Yeah.
mean, you might still want to have alcohol there, but just for the diehard alcohol people, but try doing something a bit radical. Have a look at the resources and pick an idea and do something different for a workplace event. And you'll probably find some of your first members for your sober peer support network as well.
I love that because then when you create an environment where when you create an opportunity for people
Yeah,
to come together, you see people that come out of the woodwork, kind of like you mentioned, like you might see like the ones who don't really feel like going to the bar, or that just they
yeah,
don't like that kind of environment. I mean, maybe they
yeah,
even do drink a little bit, but they're just not into that scene, right? So then
yeah,
you'll start to, you'll start to hear people talking a little bit about, drinking or not drinking or whatever, and then that gives you like um kind of momentum, right? So now you're like a team of one or two or
yeah,
three people. You're like, hey, like, and then you start to learn a little bit more
yes,
about those people. And now here you go, you formed your own peer support group. So,
yes.
yeah, I love that
Yeah.
idea. So each one of us, one of the things that I was talking to Susie Streelman, I don't know if you know her from Zero Proof Experiences, and
No.
she hosts all these incredible alcohol free event like retreats and things. And one of the things she said is if we could all speak up more, like when we're out
Yeah,
at restaurants, if we could speak up and ask specifically for, alcohol free mocktail option,
yeah,
or I mean,
yeah,
rather than just having juice or soda
yeah,
or something or water, but like kind of speaking up, and then that gets people's juices flowing. And if more people did that, they're going to start adding that to their menu. I'm seeing it
yes,
here. People are adding it to their menu. So
yeah,
it's a similar
absolutely. Yeah,
concept at work. If you can kind of just start conversations with people and
yeah,
listen to what they have to say, hear how they feel about alcohol, we might
yeah.
just find that there are more of us out there than we think.
There really will be. I
Yeah.
promise you, you'll find some.
Oh
Yeah,
my
I
gosh, Janet.
promise you.
So I'm so excited about sharing your work with the world because I mean, I think this is just, I mean, it's been around since the beginning of time, these topics around alcohols and drugs, but this now alcohol free zone that's coming up and becoming such, almost the norm. I mean, I'm wondering if
Yeah,
in the next few years it's going to be the norm almost.
yeah,
And kind
yeah,
of take out the drinking community just because we know so much more, like in the wellness space, about what alcohol
yeah,
does to us. But it's going to take all of us to really be the spearheads here, to be the leaders, to speak up with our employers, to speak
yeah.
up at restaurants, and be the ones who forge the road, right, for
Exactly.
alcohol free
Mm,
spaces and events um
yeah,
and employment spaces. It's going to be great.
exactly. I know. I do. I think just make more noise is probably my number one
Make more
tip.
noise. I love
Make more
that.
noise.
All right, I love it. So if people want to reach out to you, how do you like them to do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Janet Hadley, and I literally check my LinkedIn every single day, so you can always find me on there. And otherwise you can reach me at hello@choosesunrise.co.uk, or have a look at the website, choosesunrise.co.uk.
And I'll make sure I link all that in the show notes below. And it's been such a fabulous time sharing your story and also your work with my community. And I really look forward to them hearing it. So thank you so
Oh,
much for being
thank
here.
you. Thank you so much.
All right.